Hi, I'm Chuck Osieja. I'm the creative director at the Coalition.
25 years after our world was ripped apart from the inside, we had peace. But then, those we loved were taken.
Mom!
And everything changed.
So yeah, Gears of War 4 obviously is kind of a big deal because it's the first proper kind of full installment on Xbox One. Does it feel like a kind of daunting task, or it's something you guys are really excited about?
Well, both. I mean, it's a daunting task and it's exciting. I mean, taking over an iconic franchise like Gears of War from a developer like Epic is daunting, right? They've set the bar pretty high, and for us it was, we need to make sure that we could maintain that bar and exceed it. And so from that standpoint, it was very exciting. And our goal from the beginning was to make sure that we built something that felt like a Gears game, and then to advance it from there. So try and make something that felt better and new and innovative.
So what in your guys' minds was kind of the core tenets that you really need to deliver on for Gears of War 4?
Well, there's a foundation to Gears that people understand, right? It's the cover-based shooting mechanic. It's actually, there's a lot of stuff that makes Gears unique that people don't understand unless you really dig into it. And it's why no one's really been able to create a duplicate of the Gears experience. And it's a lot of simple elements that work really well together. So for us, that was really where we had to start, was understanding how enemies came into an encounter, how weapons were used, how the cover layout allowed the player to move through the environment in a very seamless way.
I mean, we played it at the showcase and it felt very, familiarly Gears in a good way, best possible way. I mean, was that part of kind of your remit, was to not reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, I mean, that's the highest compliment that somebody can give us, is that it feels like Gears, because that's a hard thing to do when there's 4 games and 10 years of legacy built around a developer. It's scary for fans to know that somebody else is going to take over the franchise and run with it. So for us, when somebody says, hey, it feels like Gears, that feels really good to us, because from there we went and added stuff like the vaulting and the close cover combat, and then the wind flares and other aspects that we think really makes the game stand out.
Was there any trepidation at all when you were kind of adding a new race in the Swarm, and then you've also got the DB army on top of that?
Yeah, I mean, all that stuff gives you pause, right? Because again, you wonder how fans are going to feel about it and how they're going to react. And for us, we have an incredibly passionate fan base. So unfortunately for us as well, I mean, Gears 3 ended pretty distinctly. I mean, all the Locusts died. You couldn't just bring them back. So for us, we had to invent a new army, and the Swarm was part of that. But with the story we wanted to tell, and I think players are going to be really excited about what they see, the DBs were a huge part of that as well. So I think fans will be excited about what they get to play in terms of the types of characters in both of the enemy armies.
Can you tell us a bit more about the DB army? Because I'm right in thinking you're debuting that kind of race, that faction here, right?
Yeah, it's the first time anybody's got a chance to play against them. So, from our standpoint, they were created by the COG. They were never intended to be militarized, and that's part of what you'll learn through the story arc in the campaign is why they were militarized. And they were designed to do tasks that the COG didn't want humans to do, because after the results of the Locust War, most of the population on the planet was wiped out. So when you have something where it's almost like humans became an endangered species, so the COG decided that the best way to repopulate was to take all the danger away from the citizens. So that's why they created the DBs, to do a lot of those tasks that could potentially be dangerous to humans. And then, like I said, throughout the course of the campaign, you'll understand why and how they were militarized.
Okay, and with the DB army come a kind of selection of new weapons, and you can play as them in multiplayer as well, right? Yeah.
So in multiplayer, the 2 factions are the heroes, which are the COG and the Outsiders, and then the enemies are the DBs and the Swarm. So you can mix and match in whatever combination that you want. But as far as the weapons go, the DBs do bring a bunch of new weapons to the table, which is really exciting. So we've got the Enforcer, which is a submachine gun style weapon. We've got the Overkill, which is my favorite weapon. It's an automatic shotgun that actually shoots 2 rounds per trigger pull, 1 on the pull and 1 on the release. And then we have the M-Bar, which is the sniper rifle for robots. That doesn't have a scope, but it does hold 3 rounds in the chamber, and it's a charged weapon, so the projectile actually passes through multiple enemies if you can line them up that way.
With so many weapons, because I mean, you're essentially adding a whole new bunch, did you have to kind of cut any, excise some weapons?
Well, we did have to actually cut some, just because there are no locusts anymore. So a weapon like the Digger, for example, actually has a living creature in it, which was a locust creature, a baby nemesis. So when that was shot, it would crawl under the ground, dig, and then jump up and explode. Well, once the locust went away, we lost that weapon. So for us, we did have to create some of that stuff to take the place of stuff that disappeared, but also to fill some gaps in just the arsenal of all the Gears weapons.
With the Swarm being kind of similar to the Locust, do you have kind of analog versions that kind of, like, do you have a version of the Cantus, or is it an entirely new kind of race?
Well, it's not entirely new, but just because the fact that we always have to have mirror characters. So you see that on the DBs as well as on the Swarm. And those are characters that mimic what the player does. So they take cover, they flank, they use all the weapons in the arsenal. So that basically becomes the foundation of what the enemy classes do. And then from there we start to build out. But with the Swarm, we've created a bunch of co-op enemies. So things like the Pouncer are actually designed to play a hybrid role. They pin as well as flush. And then they are best attacked with co-op with another player. So, if 2 players are working on that enemy, you're much more efficient than if you're trying to attack it by yourself.
Right, you must get a lot of people as well saying that the Swarm seem remarkably similar to the Locust. I mean, obviously that's intentional, but what are the kind of key differences between the two, would you say?
Well, beyond the mirror characters, I mean, you get into some of the bosses and they're quite a bit different. You get into some of the secondary characters like the Pouncer or the Snatcher, and they become very different in terms of how the player has to approach them and how they change the encounters. The Pouncer, for example, is a hybrid enemy that does both pinning and flushing, which has never been done inside of Gears. Usually an enemy usually has just one role. They pin or flush, and then another enemy is paired with that to really give the player a hard time. But in this case, we created something like the Pouncer, so it actually adjusts to how you're playing as a player, and you have to adjust to what role it's playing on the battlefield.
Okay, and also you've got new things like environmental stuff like the wind flares we saw in the demo. Are we going to have any other stuff like wind flares to contend with, or will wind flares kind of be all pervading throughout the story?
Well, wind flares was a big job, so we think about it as another monster, because it's a system in the game. It's not a scripted event, so every time you play through a wind flare, it plays differently. And what the wind flare can do is it impacts all sorts of aspects of gameplay. So it affects your movement as a player as well as the enemies. It can bring cover in and out of the battlefield, so you can be sitting behind a piece of cover. It'll start to shake when the wind gets strong enough, and it'll just fly out of the scene. So for you, the way that you enter an encounter during a wind flare can be completely different than how you exit it, based on what you do as a player with the destructible objects in the scene, as well as what the wind flare does to the encounter as well.
Yeah, and in the demo as well, you brought back Marcus. We saw a bit of him. Is it fun kind of calling back on the legacy and bringing back old characters like that?
Yeah, I think it was really important for us to do that, because like I said, we have such a passionate fan base that, I mean, these are people that get tattoos and cut their wedding cake with a Lancer. I mean, the passion is like nothing I've ever seen before. So for us just to abandon all the legacy characters, I think would have been cruel, to be honest with you. I mean, and the goal for us was to introduce a new group of heroes, but to have them be blessed by the old heroes. So having Marcus in the game, I think, is really important.
Also, you held the multiplayer beta earlier this year. What's the kind of feedback you had from that? What were the kind of primary things that you kind of took away from it?
Well, we did a bunch of different feedbacks types. So we bring pro players into the studio and have them play the new modes and the new weapons and the new maps and give us feedback in real time. Obviously, we communicate with our community constantly. I mean, our community director is always online with these guys, and again, they're passionate, so they give us a ton of feedback, which is really helpful. Sometimes it can be skewed, so what we do is during the beta, we wind up using a lot of telemetry, which actually tells us how players play as opposed to how they say they play. So all that stuff gets then fed back into the game, and you can see the results of the stuff that we've recently released in terms of the upgrades and the visuals. All the maps are very symmetrical, and all the weapons have been balanced based on the feedback that we've gotten.
So what would you say is the kind of biggest single thing that you're most excited to kind of put into players' hands and Gears for?
Oh, there's a lot of things. There's so much new in the experience, but for me, there's a couple of things. I love the fact that we're a part of the Xbox Crossplay program. So what that means for players is when you buy Gears of War on the Xbox One, you get the digital version also on the PC, so you can cross-play any of our co-op modes with your friends. So you can play Horde together, you can play campaign together, and you can also play co-op versus bots together. And then the other thing that we're going to start talking more about in the coming weeks is Horde mode. So Horde 3.0, I think, is my favorite thing that we've done so far. It's really exciting. I think it's, we're playing it constantly in the office balancing, and I think when people get their hands on it, they're going to be really excited by it. Yeah, Gears of War 4 is out October 11th. If you buy the Ultimate Edition, you get to play 4 days early on October 7th.